Oh, hold on.
Good
Stop, stop,
afternoon,
stop.
and it's a joy to
No,
have our
stop,
next session.
stop, stop.
Go on.
That was YouTube. The click didn't register. Right.
Right, okay.
Go. You're live now. You're live now.
Okay. So, good afternoon, and welcome to the next session of the Derwent Valley Lit Festival for 2021. Unfortunately, we're all online this year, so hopefully next year we'll be back to semi-normal, where we'll be able to have some of the online and also some in-person sessions. Today, I'm delighted that we're joined by Lisa, who hails from Scotland, and I found out she's not that far from the Kelpies this morning. I have a memory of running round the Kelpies at night for the moon run, and they were all lit up, and it was fantastic. And it is on my to-do list to go back and actually enjoy the area during the day rather than the night with the Falkirk Wheel and so forth. So that was lovely to find that out this morning. Also found out that we're actually cat lovers as well. We've got 5 in this household, and I think Lisa's got 2.
Yeah.
So I think most of her writing is based up in Scotland, but she'll explain a little bit more about that in her introduction and so forth. So the plan is basically that Lisa will do an introduction, read a chapter from one of the first books, and then we'll have a general conversation, and then she's going to do a reading from a second book. And depending on time, we might even get a third short story at the end, if we're lucky. I think we may well work towards that if Lisa's still up for that by then. So basically, I'm going to hand over to Lisa now, and she'll do an intro and then start to read from the first book. So over to you, Lisa, and thank you for coming today.
Great, thank you, Richard. I'm sorry we can't be there in person. It would be very lovely to be in your neck of the woods. I would really enjoy that.
Well, next year.
Now, I'm noticing that there's a little thing that's come up on my screen that says my microphone, but I'm hoping my microphone is working. So if anybody, if you can hear me, that's all good. Okay. So my name's Liza. I'm sorry because maybe you thought I was Scottish and now you're hearing this English dialect. Yeah, here I am. I do live in Scotland. I was living in Canada for 21 years. And I moved back to Scotland in 2017 with the plan to write novels. And of course, being a procrastinator, it took the opening of the pandemic for me to actually sit down at my desk and say, now is the time to write. I'd been a non-fiction writer before that, and I'd been a documentary filmmaker before that, and I'd been an expressive arts therapist as well. So had sort of quite a big career, and when you get to the sort of age of living, you know, when you were born, when dinosaurs were still roaming the planet, there are an awful lot of stories that I've got to tell, so they keep pouring out of me, which is wonderful. So the first book I wanted to share with you today is set in Edinburgh. It's called Murder on Morrison, and it is an amateur sleuth traditional mystery. So I'm not I love Ian Rankin. He's one of my favorite writers, but I don't do what he does, and I don't do police procedure. So my sleuth is an amateur sleuth called Rose McLaren. So I think what I'll do is I'll get started. I'll read chapter 1, and then I'm going to read chapter 2, but I'll read chapter 1, and then maybe Richard, you and I could have a chat at the end of chapter 1, and then I'll read chapter 2 as well, if that's okay. All right, chapter 1 is actually not very long, it's quite short. So chapter 1, August the 27th. Rose had usually left the shop by now. It was 8 p.m. She was excited by the new autumn recipes and looked forward to hearing Trixie, her apprentice, input about the toppings and decoration in the morning. Rose saw the flashing lights pull up outside and presumed it was another incident in the pub 2 doors away. There had been nothing but trouble there recently since the new owners had taken over, and everyone was complaining about it. It was bad for business and the local community. Rose switched off the light and pulled open the door. But the familiar routine was brought abruptly to a halt. Sally's body fell back through the door, and her head hit the welcome mat at Rose's feet. The lifeless scrap of a body was barely dressed for the wet evening. A skimpy top and torn jeans were all that covered her. A needle was hanging out of her arm, and it was instantly clear. She was dead. Rose stood for a moment, frozen to the spot, her hand still holding the door handle, her eyes locked onto Sally's lifeless corpse. In a flash, she was transported back to another doorway, another night from her own past. She'd come so far since then, fought her way through so much to get where she was now. Her mind pulled itself back to Sally. Poor Sally. The ambulance crew was yelling at her to step back. Morrison was always busy, and when Rose looked up, she saw a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. Some were taking pictures, others were casually pointing and discussing what they saw, as if Sally weren't human. It was all too familiar. Rose had been there herself once, at the receiving end of the jeers and the snipes and the dehumanizing comments. Rose felt sick. The panic rose up inside her, and she stumbled back into the chair next to the shop window. The room was spinning, and time seemed to stand still. When she looked up, she was surprised to find a uniformed female police officer staring down at her. She'd not heard anyone come in. Are you all right? What's your name? Rose McLaren. Do you work here? No. Well, yes, I own the business. This is my shop. I see. And do you know who that was? The woman in your doorway. Do you recognize her? Rose swallowed. The officer's questions were matter of fact, without emotional feeling. Rose knew the woman was just doing her job. Why couldn't she do it with a little more compassion? I know her. Knew her. Yes. She worked here once. Her name is Sally. Do we have to do this now? I'm really shaken up. Rose knew she was being assessed, whether she had any involvement or not in what had happened. And that too was all too familiar. Of course, I can have someone drive you home. We can meet again tomorrow for your statement. Thank you. Rose clung to the table for support as she got up. She looked through the window. The ambulance and the body were gone, and most of the crowd had dispersed. She narrowed her eyes as she saw a familiar figure walking across the road. He was waving at another man. They met and fell into an embrace. It was Rob, an old friend. He had also known Sally. Rose frowned. She couldn't face breaking the news to him or to Trixie that their friend, Sally, was dead. So that's chapter 1.
Excellent. I must admit, your voice over accent for the Scottish side of that was very good.
I have been accused of sounding a bit like a bit payer on Dr. Finlay by my Scottish friends.
But no, very good. I like that. I do love listening to an author actually read their work. There is just something, because we all have that sort of a quiet voice in our head when we're reading books, but it's always lovely to actually sit back and listen to an author read. So you said that COVID was the real start of this rewriting side of it. Yeah. So this was the first book, was it?
No, the first book actually is a book of short stories called Love Bites. And Love Bites is 7 short stories about the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of relationships.
Right.
So, there are murders, there is mayhem, and there's romance in that storybook. Yeah.
Excellent. So this book in particular, how long did that actually take to write? Had you had that thought for a long time before you started writing it, or?
Yeah, well, this particular story took about 3 months. I'm quite a fast writer, actually. Once I get going, I've often sort of been mulling over things for a while. So I had the sort of idea that I wanted to write murder mysteries because I've grown up reading Agatha Christie from about the age of 12. I saw Hickory Dickory Dock in a bookshop once, and my mum bought it for me. I think I was about 11 or 12, and just always loved the genre. So I'd always thought I wanted to write murder mystery, but I knew I didn't want to do police procedurals. So it was really waiting for the character, and Rose sort of came to me one day. I was actually talking to a woman who was 99 years old.
Right.
And she told me a little bit about her background, and there was something in that went, ooh, that's where my character comes in. And yeah.
Yeah, well, my dad used to have an antique business, and so I can relate to sort of opening the business up at different times and seeing different characters going about their normal day-to-day business, but also coming into the shop as well. And he had all sorts, literally you jack the lads right through to celebrities coming in one way or another. And he wasn't that far away from the teddy bear shop in Eton, so that was really a childhood memory for me. It was very much a hobby for him. I don't think he made that much money. But he was doing. He probably enjoyed going out looking for stuff and going to the auctions, but obviously came back with more stuff than he should have done, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when he died of cancer, he had a lot of stuff to be sorted through at that point, on a business and a personal level. But there we go. So yeah, really nice short chapter as well. Is that how you normally write? Is it short chapters?
The next chapter is longer. I tend to do, oftentimes my opening chapter will be a short introduction. So it could be prologue or it could be the first chapter, but I just wanted to set the scene of this tragic death that occurred on the doorstep of Rose's muffin shop.
And are you well disciplined with your writing? Do you have, can you write for a couple of hours or whatever, or do you have to really discipline yourself to say, right, I'm going to wake up on Monday morning and I'm going to write half a chapter or whatever?
Right. So I usually wake up in the morning. I have 2 cats, so they usually wake me up around 6:30.
Yes.
And, so what I used to do is I used to flick on the radio and I'd listen to the news and be pottering about till 8. And now I've learned that if I don't flick on the news, that's a perfect time for me to write, because the brain is completely clear. So I fed the cats, made a big cup of tea in my big cat mug. There you go. And then I just sort of write. And oftentimes, I'll be still sitting there at midday and then think, okay, time to stop now and maybe get something to eat.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you mentioned Ian Rankin is one of your favourite authors as well.
Yes, definitely.
Are there any other sort of Scottish-based authors that you like to read or have followed?
Well, I've been reading actually William Boyd, who's another really good author, and not necessarily so much all based in Scotland, but I am going to a few things at the Edinburgh Book Festival, which is also online. So I'm looking forward to maybe finding out a few new writers that I haven't actually had.
That is the glory of festivals, isn't it?
It really is.
You get to understand and learn about up and coming authors as much as the established authors.
Absolutely.
So and that's been a joy with the Derwent. We've had a couple of established, but most of the people are either self-published guys. So it's lovely to give them some space to promote themselves, really.
Yeah, well, really appreciate it. It's I join a few writing groups, and people are often sort of saying, they suddenly realised, gosh, I've never heard of this person, but they've got some really good books out there, and it's really nice to be able to build a relationship with readers.
Yeah, and book clubs seem to be, they've survived COVID, haven't they? They've gone a lot online.
Yeah.
But even the local ones here, they're going back to now be able to meet in their coffee shops and as they were prior to COVID now, starting to. But I think they've actually thrived and actually probably found more members by being online. And again, this has been great as well. And we've actually attracted people from further afield because of that. I've had a guy from America who's actually been part of the festival on the author side, but I've had more people interact with me from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, even all around the world at different times as well. So I can get sometimes a ping at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm thinking, who the hell's pinging me at that time? But it's their day, isn't it? So it's very interesting how that actually transcribes there.
Brilliant.
So are you ready
to go to chapter 2? Yeah, I'll go to chapter 2 then.
Over to you to read chapter 2.
All right. So we're now at October 29th. Rose bagged up the last 2 ginger, honey and lemon muffins. It was just past 2 p.m. and the sun was already on its way down. October in Edinburgh had been dreek and colder than usual. The late afternoon tea crowd would be disappointed that the new muffins were sold out. But Rose knew she didn't have time to make a fresh batch now. The ginger and lemon recipe had worked out well, and there had been more demand for it than she had anticipated. Usually, a new seasonal recipe took a few days for word of mouth to get around, but this time it had taken less than a day. Cheers, Tony. Enjoy. Say hi to Babs for me, Rose said to the stylish, bespectacled man in a grey suit, as he carefully placed his order into a hand-woven shopping basket, already filled with vegetables from the organic farm shop. How is Babs? Not so rosy, Rose. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. That's all right, Tony. Look, so long as she has an appetite and you're there to care for her, it will all work out. I'm sure of it. Tony allowed himself a brief smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They both knew the outlook for his wife wasn't promising. Well, these will cheer her up. Ginger is one of her favourites, and the way you've decorated them, they're a work of art. Yeah, not bad for a cyclops, said Rose, filling her face and pointing to her one good eye. See you in the week. Just give me a call if you need help or a delivery. Bye, Rose. Thank you. Tony was one of the regular customers who mostly lived or worked locally around Haymarket, where Rose had built her business. Muffins on Morrison had slowly and steadily grown to be a favourite with residents, workers, students and families. November 1st would be the 3rd anniversary since she had opened, starting with a half a dozen seasonally flavoured Christmas muffins and boxes of melt-in-the-mouth shortbread. The pale green and pink store with black and white pictures of glamorous stars and pin-up girls was in stark contrast to Rose's own appearance. At 5'7", with short dark hair, a straight back and a muscular frame, Rose was aware that her presence, to some, could be intimidating. Indeed, before she opened the shop, creating that physical presence was essential for her survival. Decorating the shop overtly femme was in a way a pushback to her father's final letter to that the store was just another pipe dream, more rose-tinted glasses, he'd written. But in another way, the decor represented the soft, old-fashioned underbelly of Rose's personality. The pink and green paintwork and Art Deco-style interior had started as a whimsical joke between her and her friend, Marion. But Rose's customers seemed to love it. And later, when she'd taken a poll to find out what they thought about her plans for redecorating the dollhouse-sized shop, the result was clear. Don't change a thing. Do you want to take a break, Trixie? I can manage. It's usually quiet now. Rose fixed her good eye on Trixie, who had started her apprenticeship earlier that summer. She was a pert, red-haired trainee who looked on the outside more suited to fashion retail than baking muffins. But Trixie's outer appearance, like Rose's, hid a deeper and a more complex story. Hey, Ta, I wish you'd put one of the new muffins by. Quite a success. You must be pleased. Sorry, that was terrible. The Scottish brogue was bright and cheerful, despite the busy morning and early start. I am, and so should you be. That stem ginger topping was the perfect finish. Well done. Here, take one of these. Rose handed her one of the breakfast muffins. Will you be giving me a good wee report, then? Don't push it, Trixie. I got to keep an eye on you, girl. Haha, I ken that, but it doesn't hurt to ask how your one good eye finds me. Rose shook her head. Her now permanent loss of sight in one eye had become a standing joke between them. The teasing was well meant, and she preferred it to sympathy or platitudes. Rose had no room for self-pity after what she'd been through, and she demanded the same of others when she tried to help them find their feet again. The macular degeneration that was diagnosed when she was 23 had finished her career in the RAF. She never thought she would be able to stand on her own 2 feet again, but she had. Sometimes juggling the role of mentor and manager took its toll, and her own gremlins roared, making her snap when she knew she'd been too soft, too generous, too understanding. Well, Miss Trixie, carry on like you're doing, and it will be one of the best references I could write. But screw up like the other day, and, referring to the batches of dough Trixie had burned, Rose pointed her finger to her throat and made a mock cut. Rose was smiling, but she was serious, and Trixie knew it. Trixie leaned against the shop window and took a bite from the breakfast muffin. She'd never met anybody like Rose before. In fact, she doubted there was another quite like her. Aye, she was hard, but fair, kind, and firm. And every time Trixie thought she had Rose figured out, she learned something new, like the fact that she had spent 3 years in prison. Not that Rose had told her. Rose didn't even know Trixie knew, and she had better keep it that way. Trust that low-life drug dealer Rob to blab. But then why did Rose put up with him? There were other ways to get what she needed. Standing outside the store, Trixie looked back at Rose, cleaning the counters and rearranging what was left of the baking for sale. And the sudden sound of the sirens made her jump. Trixie turned to look across the street. A police car, a van and an ambulance had pulled up outside the student accommodation opposite as a group of young women rushed out through the revolving door. They all seemed to be crying. A police officer went over to them while her colleagues ran into the building. Trixie was transfixed on the bustle and activity. A crowd gathered. Some were holding cell phones, recording and taking photographs. "What's going on?" said Rose, appearing through the door. "I heard sirens." Trixie shrugged. "It looks like someone is..." Her voice trailed off as she saw the paramedic turn to the ambulance and take a large black object from the back. "Dead," said Rose. "That's a body bag going in. I'm sure of it." Trixie put her hand to her mouth. "Come on, let's go back inside. I don't want to be a looky-loo at someone else's misfortune." Rose felt her stomach churn. The police van, the ambulance, all those bystanders with phones taking pictures and filming. Sally's death 2 months ago had brought it all back, dredging up a time in her past she would rather forget. She had been out of her head that day, yet the memory of their faces staring at her, as if she was subhuman, was etched in her brain. Rose shuddered as the bell on the door of the shop rang when she pushed it open. She knew just how easy it was to fall from grace, that everything she had built up could be wiped out in a heartbeat. "Are you all right?" asked Trixie as she noticed Rose shudder. "Yeah, I'm fine. Look, let's close up for half an hour. I could do with a break too. Tea?" But as she boiled the kettle and made 2 large mugs of the fresh dark liquid, she knew it wasn't just tea she was really needing. Rose texted Rob. "I can't do it. Can you help?" The reply pinged in immediately. "How much?" £25. "Lightweight? Sure. After you close?" "Yeah, thanks." Rose's business did well from whatever tragedy had befallen someone at the student building. A steady stream of customers, police, reporters and students brought pretty much everything Rose had left for sale that day. "There'll be nae deals for the morrow," said Trixie, as they finally cleared up and closed up. It was gone 5 by the time Trixie changed the notice on the door to closed. Someone was tapping on the window. Trixie looked up. It was Rob. "Oh, can you hear him, Rose? He's a devil, if ever there was one." "It's okay, Trixie. I said I'd put some of the leftovers to one side for him. He's not that bad." Rose's face flushed as she spoke. There were no leftovers, and she hadn't learned to lie well. "He's nae been about for a bit, though. Maybe he'd been arrested, I thought, or crawled back into the shite hole he came frae." "Wow, you really don't like him, do you?" "And you ken well why. I still think he was responsible for what happened to Sally. He's a bad one, Rose. Didn't he get mixed up with him?" Rose sighed. She knew Rob standing there was bad for Trixie, the way the events of the afternoon had been for her. Trixie was in recovery, and Rob had been one of her dealers. Why'd he come so early? "It's okay, Trixie, off you go." Trixie shrugged. She didn't want to be rude to her boss, and it was unlike her to hold her tongue, but she couldn't afford to screw up and lose the opportunity Rose was giving her. "Night then. See you tomorrow." Rose watched Trixie walk past the police vehicles and yellow tape that were blocking most of the pavement opposite, her shoulders hunched. She had avoided making eye contact with Rob and pulled up the hood of her black jacket. Rose beckoned Rob into the shop. There were still several onlookers hanging around outside the university accommodation as the police came and went. Rose recognised some of them as students who regularly came into the shop. Who had died, she wondered, hoping it wasn't a student. But her hopes were soon dashed as the 5:30 local news broke the story. A male student, a foreign national, had hung himself. Rob looked at the radio as the announcement was made. He frowned. "You know him?" Rob shook his head, but his face was pale. Rose wondered if Rob thought it might be one of his customers. A second death of a buyer close to home was the last thing Rob needed. After her former apprentice Sally had died, she had been vilified by the press as a rotten mother who had put drugs before her baby. But Rose knew the other side of the story. Her addiction had been fueled by what she had survived as a child. Rob, as a local dealer, had come under police scrutiny then, but they hadn't really bothered. After all, Sally was hardly a priority in their eyes, just as another junkie who had overdosed. Rose paced her flat, looked at the foil-wrapped parcel she had bought from Rob, and cursed herself. It was almost 2 months since her last panic attack, the night she found Sally's body. But today's events had unsettled her equilibrium, and the techniques her counsellor had shown her didn't seem to be working. Or was it her, she wondered, not getting it right, not doing them properly, screwing up as usual? Her father's words rang through her head. There'd been no compassion when she told her father why she had to quit her childhood dream and leave the RAF. Despite the fact that she was now 35 and the excuse of youth and insecurity no longer applied, she couldn't shake off the feeling of abandonment. The last time he had spoken to her was at her mother's funeral. Kind, beautiful, sensitive Jeannie, the love of his life. Rose had always known that her father wanted a boy, someone to go fishing with, mend things with, go hiking with, and she tried hard to keep up. But her father had never understood her fascination with space, flying and the galaxies she believed were out there, ready for exploration. She joined the cadets, hoping to please him, but it hadn't worked. His prejudices about the other upper classes and the overeducated blinded him to the opportunities that cadets offered girls like Rose. It was almost a matter of pride to him that he had apprenticed and not gone to college. To be fair, he was good at what he did. He could mend anything with an engine, and he had made a success of his garage. It was a business he would like to have handed on, and as he didn't have a son, a daughter would have to do. So when Rose worked hard to make sure she had the A-levels to qualify as a trainee in the RAF, it had been Jeannie, her mother, who had argued with him, defended and supported Rose's ambitions not to apprentice with her father and to take over the business. Then, just as she was about to really take off, apply for the NASA secondment program, she failed the sight test, and that was it. Her brain burst somewhere between her diagnosis, breaking up with her boyfriend at the time, Troy, and her mother's accident, a stupid fall. One had nothing to do with the other, but in Rose's father's mind, Rose was responsible for her mother's death, despite the fact that Rose was over 100 miles away. Jeannie had fallen downstairs, hit her head and died. According to the coroner, her death would have been almost instant, and she wouldn't have suffered. But his verdict brought no comfort to either Rose or her father. Rose was about to unwrap the tiny package when her phone rang. It was Rob. Have you heard? Seen the news update? Hi, Rob. No, I'm sorry. I've had everything switched off here. I've been stewing in memories. Not helpful. Hasn't the gear helped? No. I'm trying to resist. I'm scared where it will take me. Rose, harm reduction, right? You need what you need. I won't see you fall. You've come too far. Someone should have told Sally that, Rob. She'd been 9 months clean. And now she's dead.
Excellent. Very good indeed.
Thank you.
So just going back to the 99-year-old that you spoke to, was she ex-RAF?
Yeah, she had been ex-RAF, and she had flown bombers in London. She'd moved the bomber planes from one place to another place. Yeah. She was quite a small lady, but she'd lost her eyesight, and it was those two things that kind of brought me to thinking about Rose, and what the impact of, because losing her sight was very frustrating for this lady, even though she was 99.
Yeah, no, it would be. Definitely would be. Yeah, they definitely moved the planes around. I've been speaking to a guy who's doing a oral history project on the Spitfires, and quite a lot of the Spitfires were moved around the country by women.
Yeah, exactly.
At the time, and a lot of the planes were actually built in Castle Bromwich in Birmingham, which is part of Jaguar, and they've actually got a memorial now in their mortuary, funny enough.
Oh, have they?
Which is basically to do with all the ladies that built the Spitfires there. Because you hear about the Spitfires in Southampton, of course, where I was born.
Yeah.
But not so much about the Castle Bromwich. So it's interesting how that all relates there. And the women certainly did step up to the plate, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think Bridget was, I would describe her as a formidable woman.
Oh, absolutely, I'm sure. Yeah.
She became a baroness in the end. And I mean,
wow. Okay. So how did you get to meet her?
So one of the as a writer, most writers have a part-time job, unless they're Ian Rankin. He doesn't need one at all. So I do some training for an organisation, but my hobby is cooking. And in the pandemic, this care home in Bridge of Allen, which is not very far from me, needed a part-time cook for 2 weekends a month. So I applied, and now I cook there 2 weekends a month, which I love. Yeah. So,
yeah, and there'll be all sorts of characters in there.
Oh, they're amazing. They're absolutely lovely people. Really, I really enjoy them, because it's really, you don't get to meet many older people unless they're members of your family, and mine are all gone now. So yeah, it's fascinating to
lovely. No, well, thank you for doing that, and it's a lovely environment. My nan suffered with dementia at the end of her life, and we have a dementia home near to here, and they do a lot of things with memories and trying to get them to remember things, because like my nan, they're not very good at the short-term memories, but my nan used to be able to tell me all sorts of weird and wonderful stories about going around the corner to get on the motorbike to go off for the night and so forth, because she was banned from going on the motorbike, of course. But of course, they'd go around the corner and get on the motorbike and go off. And stories about going off on the trams to the cinema and dance halls and things like that. Clear as anything, but she couldn't remember, like the day that we used to, I can laugh about it now, but she used to ask the same question time and time again, like, what day of the week is it? And you tell her it's Wednesday, and then 2 minutes later you've got to say the same thing. So it's lovely, and the value of memories and so forth there. And they definitely have got life stories to tell without a shadow of a doubt, and we need to cherish those more than we do, really, I think, as a community these days. But
that's right. Well, one of the things that I also do on the side is, if people are wanting their, somebody in their family story recorded, I'll help them put it together as a book.
Wow.
So that's something that people can always contact me about.
I've got a researching the family tree group as well, so I'll certainly put the details on there.
Brilliant.
Could well be interested in that, definitely. And again, it is, it's gone a long way from just literally doing it on a piece of paper and asking the questions, isn't it now? Online and all sorts of different ways now, videos, and again, as you've been mentioning in your chapters there about the modern, the phone now, it's the modern straight away, isn't it? Anything that goes on, we get the phone out and we take a photograph of the accident or whatever. And it's instant, isn't it?
Yeah, filming things,
When look at, like, I've just listened to a talk recently about postcards. Like in the Edwardian times, that was the equivalent in those days. And we wouldn't believe it now, but they used to have up to 4 post deliveries per day. So you could literally write to somebody in the morning, I'm going to meet you in the evening, and you actually get there in the afternoon to tell them to meet you in the evening. It's
I know.
You wouldn't put that in the post today, but there we go.
It was the when people sort of talk about, well, texting, you think, well, actually we've always had communication. We just found a different way to do it. Send somebody off on a horse with a letter,
or pigeon or whatever. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, the First World War, it took weeks to get the information back. Even from the Second World War, it started to get more and more instant. Now it's just it's horrific sometimes. I think sometimes a bit of delay would not be a bad thing sometimes. If you know what I mean, for people. Because you mentioned that you do some emotional artistry as well.
I was trained as an expressive arts therapist, and I don't do that. I don't do that now. But I worked a lot with young people and families, and used both sort of training from family mediation and expressive arts therapy to help people heal from past trauma and things like that. So
because I find reading quite helpful for my mental well-being. Because you sort of escape, don't you?
Absolutely.
It's like watching a film. For that period of time, you switch off from the rest of the world and you're just involved in the story, as it were.
Absolutely.
So that's really where I really get the real benefit from reading. And my nan was the person who inspired me to get into reading. We used to go across the old railway bridge to the second-hand bookshop, and they had a bookstore owner like Mr. Ben. You would go in there, and he wouldn't be about, and then all of a sudden he would turn up, just like Mr. Ben used to on the TV. And I used to get a book there, and then she'd either read to me or I'd read to her. and that sort of became a regular thing. It was lovely.
Oh, wonderful. Very nice.
That's where my joy of books has always been from that day forward, really. I'm not a creative type at all. I did write one poem on top of a number 15 bus, but it wasn't that great. I just love reading books and promoting people, literally just purely wanting to promote them. It's not a commercial entity whatsoever. So the festival is very much a dream that I had. And luckily, a couple of local authors basically spoke to me and loved the idea and helped me put it together, really. Because at one stage we didn't even have a logo or anything like that. Yeah, we need a logo, do we? Really? And then they had a friend who could do that, and it was amazing. Literally, in about 3 weeks, we had it all done and dusted and planned. It was amazing, and people just were, we had to turn people away in the end. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And it's just been a shame the last 2 years that we've not been able to.
Really take my hat off to you. Anyone who organises a festival like this.
Oh, it was a full. Yeah, it was like a full-time on top of the full-time job.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. And each person is a slightly different personality as well, which is interesting. If you know what I mean, and how the dynamics work on that score. And then you've got to listen to and work out the logistics and rely on the technology working, which a couple of times it didn't, for example. But in both cases, the authors concerned just took it on the chin, and actually the talks were probably better without the technology, if you know what I mean. They had more of an interaction with the crowd and otherwise, but there we go. So Love Bites was the first book.
Love Bites was the first book, so then came actually then I did a young adult fiction. They weren't published in order, but this one is a gritty story about a young girl called Amelia. So it's called My Life's Not Funny. Starts off with the stabbing of her older brother who dies, he and two friends, and that came from a dream. I woke up from a dream where I had 3 men dead on a beach, all being stabbed, and I thought, oh, that's a bit scary. What's that about? So I sort of I guess going back to my documentary filming days and also my counselling days, I am very curious. So I asked the young men who were dead, what happened to you? And I didn't get a response, but then I got a girl called Amelia, who was the sister, and she was sort of like, I'll tell you the story. So she is the story is about Amelia and what happens to Amelia. We deal with her being used as a drug runner.
Right,
she's
okay,
only 12. Yeah, she's only 12.
Running through these.
You can tell I was an addictions counsellor, can't you?
You may well be, yeah. There's nothing wrong with using your work experience.
That's right. She was also potentially at risk of being sexually trafficked. So dealing with some, excuse me, quite gritty sort of subject matter. But that is the real world for a lot of young people.
Yeah, no, you're right, absolutely. No. So what is your publishing story? Have you had a real platform to get published?
I missed that because I was coughing.
That's no problem. What is your publishing story? Has it been easy? Has it been difficult?
As a non-fiction, it was easy because I had publishers. As a fiction, it's been more difficult. So I have gone the independent publishing route. I've had a couple of offers. Right. I didn't feel they were the right offers for me. So I'm waiting.
Yes.
So if a publisher wants to chat to me, I'm happy to chat, but it has to be a good working relationship.
Yes.
Where we both feel comfortable. So yeah.
Yeah, because I had a local guy who wrote a book about his family history, because him and his brother were orphaned. Both the parents died reasonably quickly, one after the other, called The Orphan Boys. And he first off self-published. And I think he sold something like 2,500 just in the local shops and things like that. And he got picked up, luckily. But I think that's part of it. He was actually in the TV world as a TV producer. So I think he had contacts, if you know what I mean, were keeping an eye on what he was doing, if you know what I mean. And it was republished. So they changed the cover as they do and things like that. But no, doing very well. So.
Yeah,
was that a reasonably quick process to get published, on that side, or?
I had so with Love Bites, I actually had been asked to contribute some poems to a lockdown anthology called Stir Crazy, and Mary Turner Thompson, who wrote The Bigamist, and two other writers were putting that together. So when I submitted my poems and they accepted them to the anthology, and then Mary said, "Have you got any other writing?" And I said, "Well, I've got some short stories." She said, "Well, send them to me." So I sent them to her, and she said, "You should put this together as a short story and anthology." So that's how Love Bites came about.
Right.
And that was then published last August, beginning of September. So I've got 4 books out since September, which is pretty fast.
That is pretty fast. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more or less full on.
Yeah.
But no, it's nice that you've got support of somebody else to say, that's good, why don't you? If you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
That must be quite positive for you.
Yeah, it was. It was really positive. And I also had a lovely phone call with a woman called Jenny Brown, who is pretty much the leading literary agent here in Scotland. And I sent her a couple of stories from Polly, which are kind of autobiographical, and they're kind of funny, and I do them as a stand-up spoken word at events. And Jenny really liked them. She said, "They're not for me, but I just want to encourage you. That's why I phoned you."
Lovely.
So that was really nice.
She have to do that, didn't she? No, that's lovely.
Didn't. It was a Sunday afternoon. I picked up the phone. I thought, who's this random person phoning me? And she said, "Hello, this is Jenny Brown from Jenny Brown Literary Agency." I went, "Oh my God."
So will we see you at the Fringe at Edinburgh eventually then, doing the stand-up?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to do Polly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's quite funny. She's in Love Bites as well. So.
Well, you have to keep me updated with that, and if it happens, I'll come up and see you.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic.
That'd be really good. So there's writing and poetry, which is fabulous.
Yeah. Now, do you want me to read a bit from A Game of Murder?
Yeah, why not?
All right. Why not? Okay.
So over to you to do that.
Thank you. So this is A Game of Murder is the number 2 in the Rose McLaren sleuthing series. There's going to be 6 books in total. That's what I have planned at the moment. Who knows? There might be more, but at the moment it's going to be 6. So this is number 2 in the series. And actually, we're just talking about the Edinburgh Fringe. So the backdrop to A Game of Murder is the Edinburgh Fringe. So I will read chapter 1. And we'll see how we're doing for time.
Okay.
Chapter 1. Trixie felt puffed with pride as she totted up the profits from the day's takings. The idea for the mobile muffin and cake stand had taken several enthusiastic discussions to convince Rose it was worth the extra investment. But halfway through the first week of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, she was already financially ahead. She had finally managed to blot out the events and thoughts that troubled her from 2 years ago. "Oh, you're looking pretty pleased with yourself, Hen," said Rob, mimicking Trixie's accent as he passed her on his way to play at the Fringe event. Trixie pulled a face and held up a wad of Scottish banknotes. "Och, you little faith, Rob." "Nah, Trixie, I always believed in you. Coming to hear me in the band?" "Yeah, I wish I could, but I've got barrows to make for the morrow. I hope it all goes well. You expecting a fair crowd?" Rob shrugged. "It wasn't bad last night, but after expenses, I'm guessing we made about 10 quid each." "Oh, well, I hope you do better tonight, Rob." Trixie watched Rob disappear into the mass of people. The Edinburgh Festival grew bigger every year, with performers from all over the world participating, as well as a huge international audience. She felt alive from the buzz of the crowd, heading to a multitude of fringe shows. She had sold out of pretty much everything except for the boxes of biscuits. The festival muffin, chocolate with raspberry sauce, had sold out first, another Trixie invention. It had taken several tries to get the recipe right, but the fudgy brownie texture with the raspberry filling was a winner. Rose had been worried it was too much like a brownie to call it a muffin, but the shop regulars who had taste tested persuaded her, and Trixie's festival muffin was launched. "Night," she called across to a neighbouring stallholder as she made her way to Northbridge and the top of the marble steps on the walk back to Morrison Street. The Scotsman Steps, linking the old and new parts of Edinburgh, had reopened last year. Transformed from a dilapidated and dangerous blight on the city, they had formed part of an art commission, bringing art out of the galleries and onto the streets. Trixie usually loved walking on the different layers of coloured marble. Tonight, though, as she turned the corner, she saw an empty vodka bottle, and then the figure of a young man wearing blue jeans and a dark hoodie lying on his front across one of the marble steps. She was reminded of earlier times. Trixie called out, then stepped to one side, making her way round him to the steps below. She had learned from experience, getting too close to a collapsed drunk can mean ending up with a black eye. Yet, despite the vodka bottle, the young man didn't look like an inebriate. "Hey, pal, are you all right?" She stood and waited to see if there was a response. "Hey, pal," she called again, louder this time. But again there was no response. Trixie stared at the prone body. He didn't seem to be moving, and she couldn't hear any grunts or snorts that usually went with passing out from too much booze. She leaned in and decided to prod his leg. Nothing. A young couple were heading up the stairs when they saw Trixie bending over the man. They immediately changed their minds and went back. "Hey, I didn't think he's that well. Can you help?" Trixie called after them, but they had vanished by the time her words were out. She pulled out her phone and called Rose. There was no answer. Trixie hesitated. She knew she couldn't just leave him there, but she wanted to run, not get involved like she had the last time. "Are you all right?" a man's voice called out. Trixie hadn't heard him coming down the stairs toward her. "No, he's nae moving." "Let me see." The man edged his way past until he was on the same step as Trixie. He tried for a pulse. "Use your phone. We need an ambulance. I think he's alive, just, but I'm not a medic." Trixie pressed 999. Her hands were shaking. Once she had made the call, it took forever for emergency services to arrive because of the crowds and the location. Trixie couldn't sit still as they waited. She was cold despite the warm evening. The man with her unbuttoned the top of the black floor-length cloak he was wearing and offered it to her. But Trixie refused the gesture. "Oh, thanks, but I didn't think it will make a difference. It's in my bones. It's nae that Baltic after all." He nodded. "Okay, well, they should be here soon. I hear sirens at least." Trixie and the man stood close to the wall above the poor soul as the ambulance crew made their way up the stairs, followed by 2 uniformed police. Within seconds, he was loaded onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, a playing card fell from his pocket. Trixie went to catch it. "Don't touch it!" one of the officers shouted at her, making her jump. "Sorry." The card fell face up. It was an arty version of the Queen of Spades. Trixie hadn't seen it before. It didn't seem to go with the young man in jeans and hoodie with well-worn sneakers, now covered in a grey blanket and being carried down to the ambulance. The officer picked up the playing card and placed it in a plastic bag. "Was this bottle here as well? Did you touch it?" The officer pointed to the empty bottles of vodka 2 steps below them. "No, I didn't touch it, and it was here, just like that, with the cap off when I came." "What time was that?" Trixie shrugged and looked at the man. "Oh, about 5 minutes before he came. I called 999 a few minutes after." "All right, around 5 minutes before 6 o'clock then. Do you agree with that, sir?" "Yeah, that's about right," the man nodded. "But can we go now?" "Yeah, but in case we need to speak to you both again, where can we contact you?" Trixie and the stranger gave their details to the police. "So you two don't know each other?" "No," they said in unison. Afterwards, as Trixie made her way back to Muffins on Morrison, she realized she hadn't taken in the stranger's name or where he was from. He seemed curious about who she was, almost as nosy as she expected the police to be about someone finding an almost dead body. He'd invited her for a drink to settle her nerves, but there was something about him. That cloak he wore was creepy, for one thing. She shuddered at the thought of putting it on. She hoped the man they had found on the steps would make it, and that her call had given him a chance to live. She felt numb. Rose was still working in the back kitchen of the shop when Trixie arrived. She was pouring batter into muffin cups. "How did you get on? Another good day?" Rose called as she heard Trixie unlock the front door and make her way into the kitchen. "Sorry I missed your call. I was on the loo." "Oh, heavens to Betsy, Trixie. What on earth has happened?" Trixie was pale. Her breathing was irregular, as if she were about to faint. She dropped the bag she had been carrying and moved forward toward Rose. Rose grabbed her quickly and guided her into the shop where she could sit down. "I'll get some water. Stay there. Keep your head on the table."
Trixie sipped the water slowly as she told Rose what had happened. It reminded me of... Sorry, Trixie, I can see it's really shaken you up, but at least you were able to call for help, and he's alive? Oh, when they loaded him onto the stretcher, I thought it'd be Dr. Reynolds after you found out he was run over and then murdered at the hospital. Everything flashed through my mind as if it was all happening again. Oh, Trixie, I'm sorry. Look, why don't you come and stay over at my place tonight? I've already prepped the batters, and there's enough to see us both through the morning. Rob can deliver some fresh stock to you at lunchtime. Okay? You sure? Thanks. I didn't think I want to be alone. Yeah, of course, we can watch a film or something funny. We could both use some cheering up. Trixie nodded. Maybe this would be an opportunity for Rose to talk to her about what was on her mind too. She'd been out of sorts for the last few weeks, but Rose had snapped at both Rob and Trixie when they had asked her if she was all right, what was bothering her. They hadn't really talked properly, other than shop business, since February, and now she thought about it, since Rose had come back from the skiing holiday with Sarah. But Sarah had vanished from Rose's life as quickly as she'd seemed to enter it. It was after the holiday that Rose had moved flats. Despite redecorating and moving furniture around, the ghost of Gary's brother lying dead on her bed 2 years earlier had never left. Her new flat in Custelfine was a tad further from Morrison Street, but peace of mind more than made up for the additional distance. So I'll stop there.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Can I take you back to Canada?
Yes, you can.
Were you actually born in Canada?
No, I was born in Essex, actually.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I was born in Essex. My mum and her grandma and maternal family going back to the 1700s were all born in and around Stirling in Scotland.
Right.
So he spent as a child every summer pretty much up here, and then moved to Canada in 1996.
So how old would you have been when you went to Canada?
How old was I? Really going to ask me that question?
I'm not going to ask the other question, don't worry.
Well, I was 39 when I went to Canada.
Right, okay. Because I was just going to get an idea of whether you went through the English or Scottish educational system before you went to Canada or not.
No, I went through the English educational system.
Right, because I was going to say, did you miss out on the stick of the dump and things like that as a child? But obviously not. You actually went through the normal. So was there a book that stuck out for you when you were a child?
Yeah, I mean, I was an absolute avid reader. So my my grandmother used to take me to the bookshop, and I'd go to the library, and then I'd be under the table and I just read a book, and I was an only child, so but it was a sort of it was a way of traveling, right? It was a way of making friends. It was just it was such a wonderful world. So I loved Enid Blyton. I love what Katie did. I love Jane Eyre. A whole different range of books, I think. But and then, as I say, when I was about 12, I got onto the sort of the murder mysteries. There was also a Scottish writer who had the Susan series, which was a teenage girl who sort of late teens, I think, got into sort of solving mysteries and having adventures. Right. So yeah, always sort of fallen for that. Yeah.
So in Canada, was that mostly the documentary work out there, or?
No, that was all here. My documentary filmmaking. Okay. I worked for a company called TV South, which was I went from the BBC working on children in need to Television South and made documentaries. And I worked on a program which you may or may not remember called Highway with Sir Harry Seacombe, which was which was a wonderful. Again, it was a lovely experience. And I got to go and meet lots of people and help them tell their story through small interviews. So we had everybody from. We had Prince Philip was the poshest person I met.
Right. Was he posh?
Oh, he was actually quite nice. We were told to not speak to him on the day of filming unless it was Harry, but he actually spoke to me and everybody else. Critical went
I
out
think
the
Royals
window.
are pretty good at that, to be honest. They are used to talking to us commoners, aren't they? If you know what I mean. And he certainly, especially if you were in his sort of sphere of interest, the carriage driving and so forth. Again, a lot of time with the Mountbattens, wasn't he? doing NAS, etc., with Lady Mountbatten and so forth. So, yeah, fascinating. I imagine he's a fascinating, or would have been a fascinating guy to interview, I would have thought. But,
yeah, he was great. I mean, so I had to do some research, and I always gave Harry the sort of cue cards on, you know, what questions are we going to ask, just as a reminder, because we would have obviously gone through it. So I handed him the cue card, and of course the Prince Philip said, have you got one for me, my dear? And I sort of looked at him and went, thinking, I've been told not to speak to you. So just sort of, you know, anyway, I thought, well, I'll just answer, because, you know, it'd be stupid not to. So yeah.
So was there a favourite interview?
I think my most favourite interview was we went out to Ghana. Actually, I went on the Human Factor. And we spent time filming people who had volunteered on a ship called Anastasis, and they were doing medical operations, saving people from life of being beggars because of cleft palate and other stuff. And they had a young, I just remember this young child. Her father had walked miles carrying this child. It had been an accident, a paraffin fire, and the child was burned, and he carried her to the ship, and he brought her in. She was just a little scrap, you know, horribly burned. And I think that for me was probably one of the most meaningful programs that I did. Although I did do Helen Shapiro's life story, and that was very fun. She was amazing to work with, and she really liked what I did. So yeah.
So you have certainly had some life experiences, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think storytelling is something that I've always felt very passionate about. So I'm very happy to be writing stories, you know, both for people who want to tell their own story, but also, you know, my fiction characters. And yeah.
So what about a place you've performed? What would be your best place you've actually performed, or favourite place you've performed?
Well, in terms of performance, I haven't done that much spoken word, but there's a fellow here in Falkirk, actually, called Ian Maxtone, and he does a series of events, and he's got an event called One Weekend in Stirling. So the first time I did a performance was with Polly, actually, was at One Weekend in Stirling at the Settle Inn, which was great fun. And we're back this year. We're going to be doing.
Was that actually in the pub itself or in the market?
Yeah, no, doing it in the pub itself.
Lovely.
So we're going to be doing it again, and it's around about the same weekend as Bloody Scotland. Don't know if you know about Bloody Scotland. So we have all the murder mystery people come and stuff like that. So it's it's a gret weekend, actually.
Brilliant. How have we got time for a short story to finish us off?
I think we've got. It says it's 2 minutes to.
So yeah, well, I'm quite happy to do an encore with you if you're happy.
Okay, are you all right for me to go on a bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I won't read the whole story because it will be long. It'll be a bit too long, I think. But I'll read an extract. So do you want something a bit funny?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So it's a bit naughty, this one.
Oh, that's all right. we can. It's not quite the watershed yet, so we're all right.
All right. Okay. So this is called All Change and Mind the Gap.
Okay.
Polly critically appraised her 58-year-old naked self, performed a twirl in front of the wall mirror, and wondered aloud, was she really date ready? The lumps, bumps, and missing bits were a stark contrast to her 28-year-old self, similarly twirling back in the day, supporting Janet Rager and luring her sexy American Clark lookalike into bed. Those were the days, she sighed, not for the first time regretting giving up casual bonking for God when she turned 31. That decision, triggered by a car crash and embracing evangelical theology, had led to husband number 2, a musical stalwart of the church. But the righteous Christian pianist, who turned out to have some questionable fetishes, decided to play away with his organ, and Polly, at 33, found herself wandering yet again in the desert of singleness. The church demanded celibacy, and Polly acquiesced. 6 years later, and the fact she missed a good rogering, love and desire trumped the risk of hell and damnation. Polly married husband number 3, ringing in the change by choosing a non-practicing Muslim and moving to Canada. She wasn't sure if it was her destiny to be single that she had been fighting against, or just that she was lousy at picking good men. She believed good men did exist, and she even knew a few, but they were either gay or married to other people. God, it seemed to Polly, was indifferent to her plight. Polly gave herself another scan and self-scored a 7 out of 10. No cellulite, visible waist, great skin, and a comfortably voluptuous bum. What'd you say, Cat? The black feline observed Polly from her favourite warm spot above the radiator on the window ledge in the bedroom and blinked lazily. Typical, you ask, Cat. And really, you score a 7, interrupted Speech Bubble. Polly shook herself, trying to ignore the inner voice of her nemesis. Yes, I'm a 7, she retorted aloud. Huh, well, if you think so, Polly, who am I to argue? Polly eye-rolled, feeling more 14 than 58. Speech Bubble had emerged when Polly turned 50, in the same way her imaginary friend did when she was 5. A somewhat lonely only child, Polly's curiosity usually got her into trouble with her stern Scottish Presbyterian grandmother. Speech Bubble was her voice, the critical voice of reason against a wayward and active imagination, which either gave Polly pause for thought or something to battle against. Polly and her neighbour had spent the previous evening bemoaning the change. Why had nobody told them about menopause? Hot flushes were one thing, but memory loss and a daily hormonal roller coaster absolutely stank. It's as if all women post-period are just not relevant, said Jay. Well, they're not going to make a profit from us until we're ready for adult nappies, giggled Polly. Jay was also single and raising 2 daughters, although Jay's ex, realising he had lost a diamond due to carelessness, was at least still useful when Jay needed a job done. I saw your ex over again yesterday, Polly laughed. Jay grinned. Yep, apparently the new, younger, smarter mail order bride is not as... Jay circled her face with her fingers and ran her fingers dramatically over her breasts, emphasizing her features, and winked. Jay was gorgeous, a showstopper. But here's hoping I soon have a new fish to fry. Jay handed Polly her phone and showed the profile she had created on a dating site. So I might stop
Lovely.
there.
No, she sounds the right character, as Polly. I'm just waiting for Peter to copy and paste because we've actually got 3 questions on the YouTube
Brilliant.
chat. So
thank you.
I'll be able to ask you some questions there. So we haven't been talking to an empty audience, which is fantastic.
Fabulous.
So the first question is, do you have a fiction process?
No, I don't. I'm very much what they call a pantser writer.
Right.
So I have the character and I go with the character where the character takes me. So what happened with, actually, interestingly enough, A Game of Murder, is that I had a whole plan for the book, deciding, no, I'm going to be a plan writer. And I planned it, and then the characters and I literally fell out.
Right.
So they stopped talking to me, and I'm thinking, well, I can't write the book without you.
Yes.
So I then had to go back into it and literally dump a lot of words that I'd written, and went, okay,
Right.
you tell me the story. So that's my process. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you use that sort of similar thing for the non-fiction? Apparently.
The non-fiction I very carefully research. So I wrote a book for Lion Books, which was the spiritual journey of men in prison. So I made sure I did a lot of research before I actually put words on paper. I'm working with a woman. I'm going to be hopefully telling her story, which is about her experience of having Asperger's. So again, it will be a lot of research before we actually put the words down on paper. I wrote a book about breast cancer. So again, it's making sure that I've got the facts right.
Yes.
So it's quite different.
It's still worthwhile telling the stories, though, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But it's, the non-fiction is more research and planning than the fiction.
I think there's one more question. How do you get around a brain freeze or just an inability to write? Hopefully not too long. Writer's block, if you know what I mean.
Oh, right, writer's block. Yeah.
Do you get periods like that?
Yeah, so what I do is I do go back to my old skill set, and I ask the character questions. So it might be that I'll sort of imagine that I'm, literally sitting opposite them, and I'll say, okay, so what are we going to do now? Or what did you feel about this, or what do you think about that? And I'll have a conversation with them, and that tends to unfreeze me. Another method I'll use is to use writing prompts. So I think, I'll think about maybe making eggs. Okay, I'm going to write about making eggs, and just give myself, like, I'm going to write a 50-word short story on making eggs, and that kind of gets me over that block, if you like. Yeah.
No, very good. I think your training has certainly helped you with that, then, hasn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that either. And it sounds like you've used your life experiences to also help you with your writing as well, because like Canada was mentioned in that short abstract there, and we've mentioned the drugs a couple of times, haven't we? And I imagine that was part of your counselling and side of things. Absolutely. There. So I think that's a very good thing, and you've basically turned your life experiences now into a. Are you now thinking that you might be able to get to a stage where you might be able to become a full-time author?
I am very much hoping so. I've signed up at the grand old age of however old I am. We're not going to go there.
No, I'm not going to go there.
I've signed up to do the MLit at Stirling University. So I wanted to do another master's for a while, and I thought, okay, this opportunity came up. So
never too late. Well done, you.
I'm doing an MLit starting in September. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll be a bit more in person than online, hopefully, as COVID starts to.
It's going to be blended. So and the professor has promised that we will have in-person tutorials and discussion groups. So
excellent.
Yeah.
So do you have we've talked about the Edinburgh Fringe possibly being a goal. Are there any other writing or performance goals that you can think of now that you're working towards, or is it just as it comes?
Well, I'd like to get the full book of Rose McLaren murder mysteries out. I would like to get that sort of set completed. I have a domestic noir that I've been writing for 2 years. I've written it from his point of view. I've written it from her point of view, and now I'm going back in to rewrite it from a narrator, third-person point of view.
Wow.
Because it hasn't. I felt that it didn't work.
Right.
In the first person. I like first person, but it didn't. I felt that it didn't kind of give balance to the characters. So I'm going back in, and then a historical trilogy, which is actually
keep them busy then.
Yeah, I'm actually. So it's interesting because people sort of assume that a writer writes in one genre, and a lot of people change their names because they do skip genres. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go. You know what? I have a range of things.
Yes.
There'll be something for you.
And it's good to be busy and able to do that. And I imagine that must be good for writing as well, that you're mixing and matching as well. So you're not all going down one aspect of it.
And you can, because I think I get bored easily, to be honest with you. So I think if I was just stuck in one, it would feel a little bit, oh no, this is too limiting. I like to spread my wings, as it were.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed your readings and our discussions, and I hope you have too.
I really enjoyed talking to you, Richard.
And I hope that we can explore some way of doing it in person next year, because we're only across the border a little bit, if you know what I mean. Not too far into England, if you know what I mean.
Not too far, absolutely.
So it'd be really lovely. At worst, we could do something again like this, but I would love to have the opportunity to work with you to see what logistics we can do to get you down to do something down this neck of the woods if it ties in with other stuff as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't promise any appearance fees or anything like that, but I'm sure we can sell some books, etc. And just to finish up with, that'd be quite a good way to finish. I've seen on the website that people can actually order signed copies from you directly. Is that right?
They can, yes.
Yeah. And are you then available on the normal horrible, whereas it is Amazon World and so forth? I'm very much an independent supporter.
Yes.
Amazon is there, does a good job, don't get it wrong, but I'm very much a supporter of the local bookshops as well.
Yeah, no, me too. So yes, I'm available through Amazon directly from me at LizaMilesWriter.com. And excuse me, Draft Digital for My Life's Not Funny, so that is out wide as well.
Excellent stuff. Well, we'll add these links to the video, so that basically people who catch up with it will be able to see that. But I've been delighted that we were in double figures of viewers, which is not bad for a Saturday afternoon. But hopefully some other people will catch up with it afterwards as well, and we will publish it around, and I'll send you the links and so forth on that. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for spending the time and actually allowing us to have that encore as well, which I think was lovely as an introduction to that side of you as well. And I hope it won't be too long until you get an invite to appear at the Fringe, and then we can come and see you up at the Fringe as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It's been really fun.
So enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you very much for your time. And we'll close up there, and we'll give it a wrap there. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.